Today we're going to talk about one of history's most terrifying figures, Heinrich Himmler. Now, he wasn't a general on the battlefield or some charismatic speaker. No, he was a quiet, meticulous bureaucrat who became the chief architect of the Holocaust. And that brings us to the really big question, right? How does a man with a totally normal background end up becoming a key figure in the murder of millions of people? It's a deeply disturbing question, so let's try to trace that path. So, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at his background. Then, we'll see how he built this massive empire of terror. We'll examine the tools he used for repression and his role in implementing the final solution. Then, we'll get to his betrayal and his end. And finally, we'll talk about the chilling legacy he left behind. All right, let's start at the beginning. Who was this man long before he had all that power? You know, the craziest thing about Heinrich Himmler is how unbelievably ordinary his beginnings were. He was born into a regular, conservative, middle-class family. His dad was a schoolteacher. He was raised to be a diligent, hardworking student, though he was apparently sick a lot as a kid. There was absolutely nothing in his childhood that screamed, future mass murderer. And it gets even more normal. He went to university and studied agriculture. Yeah, he wanted to be a chicken farmer. This contrast between this mundane, almost boring start in life and the monstrous ideology he'd later embrace is really key to his whole story. Okay, so his path took a really sharp turn when he got involved with the Nazi Party. This is where he found what you might call his life's work, building an organization that would become a synonym for terror itself. And get this, for a starting point, when Himmler took over the SS in 1929, that's short for Schutzstaffel or Protection Squadron, it was nothing. It was just a tiny group of 280 guys whose main job was to be Hitler's personal bodyguards. Insignificant, really. But by 1944, under his obsessive leadership, that number had, well, it exploded. The SS was now a massive state within a state, with over 800,000 members. This was his creation, his personal empire, built from almost nothing. So how on earth did he do it? Well, he shaped the SS around a few core fanatical ideas. First, absolute, unquestioning loyalty to Hitler. That was number one. Then he brought in these bizarre so-called racial purity standards for anyone who wanted to join. He demanded iron discipline, and he mixed it all up with this strange obsession with ancient Germanic myths and pagan rituals. It was a potent and terrifying combination. Now that he had this incredibly powerful organization, Himmler started to gather up all the instruments of state security. These would become the tools he used to terrorize an entire continent. And this table really lays out his whole toolkit of terror. He controlled the Gestapo, right? The secret police that could make anyone disappear. He ran the SD, which was the SS's very own intelligence agency. He was in charge of the entire network of concentration camps, which started as prisons, but, well, we know what they became. And he commanded the Einsatzgruppen. These were mobile death squads that murdered hundreds of thousands of people. And here's the real game changer. The pivotal moment came in 1936. He was made the chief of all German police. Think about that. He merged the regular state police with his own fanatical SS organizations. From that point on, every single lever of state security was in his hands. He had created a perfect police state, and he was in charge. With this kind of absolute power, it was Himmler who was given the Nazi regime's most horrific assignment. So now we have to look at his direct role in organizing the Holocaust, or what they chillingly called the final solution. The final solution. It was the Nazis' bureaucratic code word for their plan. The total, systematic, industrial-scale murder of every Jewish person in Europe. And in 1941, Adolf Hitler officially gave Heinrich Himmler the job of organizing and carrying out this genocide. And this is where it gets so deeply disturbing. When you look at his responsibilities, they read like a logistics manager's checklist, not a murderer's. He organized deportation trains from all over Europe. He oversaw the construction and management of death camps like Auschwitz. He administered the industrial process of killing. He would even personally visit the camps to make sure they were operating with maximum efficiency. It's just cold. But as the war turned against Germany, this man, the one who demanded absolute loyalty above all else, would end up betraying his own leader in a pathetic attempt to save his own skin. And as you can see here, the end came for him really fast. In April 1945, with everything collapsing, Himmler secretly tried to cut a deal with the Allies. When Hitler found out just days before his own death, he was enraged and ordered Himmler's arrest. After Germany surrendered, Himmler went on the run in disguise, but he was caught by the British on May 21st. Just 2 days later, he was dead. He bit down on a cyanide pill he had hidden. So, Himmler escaped justice. He never stood trial at Nuremberg. But in our final section, we're going to look at the legacy he left behind, a really disturbing question about the nature of evil itself. The numbers are just mind-boggling. It's almost impossible to comprehend. Through his bureaucratic efficiency, Himmler was directly responsible for the murder of at least 6 million Jews, plus hundreds of thousands of other people, Roma, Slavs, political opponents, the disabled. The scale is just staggering. And this brings us right back to that paradox from the beginning. People who met him said he wasn't some raving monster. He was polite, fussy, like a mid-level manager. He was a loving dad. And yet, this same man was a cold-blooded fanatic who orchestrated this unimaginable cruelty, seemingly without a second thought. How do you square those two things? This contradiction is what the philosopher Hannah Arendt famously called the banality of evil. It's this idea that the greatest evils in the world aren't always committed by monsters, but sometimes by ordinary people, by bureaucrats who are just doing their jobs, following orders, and efficiently carrying out horrific tasks. Himmler might just be the ultimate example of that. And that really leaves us with a final, chilling question. Himmler's story isn't just about one evil man. It's a terrifying warning about how the very systems we create for order and efficiency, bureaucracy, logistics, chains of command, how those same systems can be turned into instruments of absolute destruction when they're put in the service of a hateful ideology.